Okay, we're online. We're live now. So this is Senate Government Operations. It is January 21st. And again, I'll just lay some ground rules. I won't be as detailed as I have been in the past, but the one thing I will do is say we do not use chat. So anybody who's out there in the meeting, but not, and I'm on my iPad now, so I can only see 9 people. So I don't know who else is there, but we do not use chat. And the reason we don't use, except for Gail to post links to things that come up. The reason we don't use chat is because if we were in the committee room in person, we would not allow sidebar conversations to go on. And that indeed is what chat is a sidebar conversation. So laying that ground rule, if anybody uses it, they will be completely ignored. So, so we were having a discussion. We're going to look at the VLCT. We're going to hear from VLCT first about their priorities for the year and how COVID money helped them and didn't help them and what more we could do. But first, I would just like to say that apparently there was an article by me or a commentary or something in, where did they say? The
Times Argus.
Eagle Time?
Times Argus, I think she said.
Times Argus. About the residency requirements. And had I known that was going to be an article, I might have composed it a little bit differently. I don't even remember how I did, but what it was an answer to a constituent question. It was not necessarily meant to be an article in the paper. So anybody who thinks that I may have written it in, I don't know, not quite journalistic terms, please forgive me. It was never meant to be an article. So, but I guess it is. So hopefully I said reasonable things.
Well, the important thing is you responded to your constituents' concerns.
It wasn't even my constituent.
Right, I know. A constituent concern.
But
Senator Clarkson?
It is an interesting thing, which is when so I sent that to Jeanette. She did a great job answering it. And it's just interesting that people would take an email without asking and publish it as a commentary. That seems to be, at least somebody could ask and say, thank you for your answer. It's so good. Would you mind if I sent it to the Times Argus? That would be a nice thing to do, a thoughtful thing to do. Just saying.
Well, from now on, when I compose responses, I will assume that they're going to be read by the world. Okay, so Gwyn, you are with us. I don't know if Karen is with us or not. Okay, so Gwyn, if you would like to talk to us about the VLCT priorities, and then what we're going to do next is after that is go to the preparedness bill that we had before, and Tucker and Ameren will both, I think, weigh in on it. I'm not sure how they're going to do that. And then we're going to hear from EMS this afternoon also. So, Gwyn, and just let me say that for some reason today, I'm upstairs in my cold, unheated room with my gloves on and my, but for some reason this morning, I kept losing my Wi-Fi, my internet connection. I think it's something that's happening outside, but if I do, just continue. And Anthony, would you take over?
You betcha.
Thank you. Okay, Gwyn.
Thank you. Gwyn Zakoff from the Vermont League of Cities and Towns. Madam Chair, should I be going through COVID related stuff, or do you want us to go through our priorities?
You do it in any order that you think is
Okay.
the best. You can interweave them, whatever.
Sure. So I guess I'll start off with COVID stuff. The overarching lesson learned from the last year, I think from responses we've gotten to surveys we put out to our membership, has been that when there's a flood of resources and the de-siloing of agencies and regions and towns, things work really well. So that's a huge umbrella perspective is to look at improving systems in general. I think everyone in government tries to improve systems, but I think that the de-siloing and breaking down of barriers has helped everyone. And the mass communication and public outreach has also helped everyone. And every one of our surveys of talking to our municipalities, specifically related to the pandemic, mentions of the bi-weekly or the twice-weekly governor's press conferences, the incredible help that clerks have gotten from the Secretary of State's office, the incredible help that towns have gotten from ACCD, and Department of Health, and basically all agencies. I think we've gotten the most positive feedback in the last year about interacting with state agencies since the pandemic began, which is really nice to see.
Mm-hmm.
So I think I hope that carries forward, and it puts a nice little bright star on the top of the tree, to be thankful for that. I think that the Elgar grants, the ones that were provided to municipalities, those are sort of the second thing that towns and cities have mentioned as being the most helpful. I think it's worth mentioning maybe to the EMS folks that are coming on later today. I think there's a breakdown once you get to talking about municipal services that aren't really municipal, that kind of get lost in the mix, and that we saw that happening with public safety services like EMS that are not municipal in nature, but they might be nonprofits that are operating separately and don't have access to municipal resources or as direct access to municipal resources. The same thing happens with utilities. Sort of utilities at the local level got lost in the mix as well when we were talking about access to monies. So that was a great lesson learned for VLCT, because we're so focused on our members that we sometimes lose sight of the little nuances that are tied into municipalities that get lost. So, the issues of having monies to help with arrears for like water systems, whether it's fire districts or municipal, that are thankful to not have to provide to put any more burden on their service users, but at the same time are not having access to the monies they need to deal with not just the normal day-to-day operations when you're talking about, buying chemicals, paying for staff, doing lab testing, those sorts of things, but also adding on PPE and having more testing being done. It was a stress to the system, and then having to have deferred. You're seeing a lot of towns are basically deferring off capital improvements that are actually really necessary when we're talking about how we want to have clean water. It's a very important thing, but they're putting off really necessary capital improvements to infrastructure in order to sort of make do in the interim. So the revenue losses and unpaid bills has resulted in increased costs, and so that's something to be mindful of, and that's not small money. These are big budget items for communities. And coming out on the other end of the pandemic, there's still going to be arrears, and there's still going to be infrastructure changes, and it's just going to be harder to catch up. So the other issues with COVID, I think your committee has covered with the election stuff and talking to the clerks and how successful that was. So it's encouraging to see both chambers working on these issues of learning from the successes of what went down. And so I don't think we need to expand too much more on the COVID stuff. That brings me to the municipal priorities for VLCT, because one of our overall municipal priorities is, providing towns the authority and the funding and the resources that they need to kind of mitigate these effects of the COVID-19 pandemic as we're, moving forward and over the next several months and potentially years. We also have, obviously you're our champion, Senator White, our self-governance initiative, which has, it's not your committee at all. It's not the Senate, actually, it's the House. And so we are trying really hard to rally our members that are adding these sorts of provisions about broad-based access to charter changes that are adopted by other towns and having access to them. I think Winooski was one. I think that 69% of voters approved that at the local level. But basically, a thirst for from towns wanting to have more autonomy and authority at the local level to do local things. And we're going to try again with the House, maybe start a bill there instead of the Senate, but we're getting a lot of pushback on that. So we are not going to, I hate to say, not waste time on an issue that's not going to go anywhere, but we need to be really realistic about what outcomes we're going to be able to get from that chamber.
Can I, a couple things here. I don't know, Gwen, if you want us to interrupt you with questions as you go.
Yeah, please.
Okay, so Senator Clarkson.
Thank you. Gwen, do you have a notion statewide? Excuse me. Go to somebody else first.
Okay, while you're coughing here, I will just ask Gwen where or I guess we can talk about this more later after we talk. We'll talk more in detail about the pilot project and why, and I'll try to talk to Sarah about where the pushback is coming from. But Senator Polina.
I was just confused about something you said, Gwen. You mentioned the towns looking at charter changes in other towns or something like that. I'm not sure what you meant by that.
Well, so it was sort of because the pilot didn't have any action last year after you passed it the year prior. There was a lot of discussion from communities who were saying, you know what, like, why don't we just ask for general charter authority to borrow charter changes that are already passed, but they're just available in other towns. So if it's good for the goose, it's good for the gander. If it's good enough for Burlington, why is it not good enough for Richmond or South Burlington or Bennington or whoever? So there's been a few towns, I believe, most of them are Chittenden County towns. Williston, I believe, was one, and then Winooski was another, and there might be others that I don't know of, but those passed already.
What was it in this committee yesterday? I'm losing my mind here, but that we're going to have a rash of charters being proposed for around one particular issue. What was it? Was it here?
Was it the cannabis tax one?
Oh, yes. Sorry.
Right.
Okay.
I think that what might happen is if towns are adding it to their town Australian ballot, they might be adding that on the same ballot as a charter amendment. I can't say for sure, but there's been discussion, there's been consideration, and so I don't know where that,
Okay.
final numbers were.
Okay. I couldn't remember, and okay. So Senator Clarkson, are you back with us?
I am, but I've been muted and can't.
No, you're not. We can hear you. We can't see you though.
Okay. I can't.
There you
are.
Oh my God, how exciting. Sorry about that.
So do you have a question?
Yes, my question for Gwen is, do we have a sense statewide of the revenue loss to the municipalities on sewer, water, whatever the loss is? Do we have a notion of the total cost of that? And are we, because that isn't necessarily fully lost. I mean, we could conceivably, if we get additional stimulus money for states and local governments, that could be covered and then forgiven to the individuals by the towns. So it would be great to get the notion. I think we'd appreciate knowing what that actual revenue loss is.
Yeah. Karen, so they, was it the Green Mountain Water Association? They've been tracking this at a water utility level. We've been tracking it at the league, and it changes month to month because, they, especially for utilities, there's towns do their billing cycles in a different manner. You know, most of them do it quarterly, but sometimes they do it once a year, sometimes twice a year. So the numbers are constantly changing. I will ask Karen to get me that information so then I can present it to you as testimony. So you have it in front of you. But I know that from towns, at least as of December, I think that was the last time we surveyed towns. We had towns that were fine, like Williston's a really great example because they have those big box stores that have commercial real estate where they're doing just fine. You know, they have very little to no arrears that are any different than in any normal year. Then you have towns that have upwards of 25 or more % of ratepayers who are not paying, and we're talking tens of thousands of dollars that are of monies that they are really dependent on to basically put back into the system. And it's fine for 3 months. It's okay for 6 months, but once you go on towards 9 months to a year, it puts these severe stresses on the system. But I can get you that information as soon as I get off with.
Right.
Senator Polina, you had a question?
Well, there was also another kind of like lost revenue. I don't know if this came up in many other towns, but in Barry, they were concerned that for a long time, they couldn't use the Barry Auditorium. When normally they would be renting that out for events and stuff. And so they were not happy that they couldn't sort of get that money reimbursed. It was lost revenue. It wasn't that anybody was in arrears, but it was just that they normally would be renting out that space and having events and making money for the city, and they couldn't do that. So it's just another kind of loss that the towns endured.
Sure. Yeah, I think that's true for parking. It's true for a bunch of other minor things, but I think the utility ones have risen to the top.
Sure.
And interesting, like tax payments haven't. I mean, it's not like it hasn't been a problem, but it has been less of a problem, probably because of the access to monies from Vermonters that have been able to make good on their tax obligations. But
Senator Clarkson?
So Anthony brings up a good point, and one that we're going to need to be watching, all of us in various committees, is the revenue from commercial real estate, because commercial real estate is going to take it on the chin. I mean, I think we're going to see a huge impact on our non-resident tax, our revenue from non-resident taxpayers, and a shift of that in the next couple of years. So that would also be an interesting thing for us, for VLCT to be tracking, because when you talk about Williston, that's a plus and a minus that they have those commercial big box stores, because given the shift in purchasing, they may not be around for very long.
Well, I think that also, it's a little foreshadowing and maybe a little presumptive, but with the Wayfair decision and the ability for towns to have access to local option sales tax revenue from people pressing, purchase for an online sale, the fact that a lot of towns don't have a general store, have any store, let alone big box stores, but they do have a lot of towns, people in their towns that are buying online. Why wouldn't you put a charter amendment to get that? I don't know why you wouldn't. So there's been there's been discussions on that as well. And I think the issue of residential sales skyrocketing in terms of prices, and there's been concerns with the and speaking to the commercial real estate issue, is that the professional assessors and listers in the town and the Department of Taxes have been tracking this and have been paying close attention to this issue, because this could really mess with the property evaluations moving forward in a quick period of time. So I'm glad that you, Senator Clarkson, you're eyeing that, because we've been eyeing it as well, as has the Department of Taxes. And the list, and if you want to go into more detail about that in the committee, just about the impact, I would talk to the Listers and Assessors Association. They are a fabulous resource, because they are professionalized, and just like the Clerks Association, they really understand the nuances.
And once a ways and meaning, always a ways and meaning.
It's good. It's good.
Right, Keisha?
I think most of the other, obviously the cannabis issue is a big issue for us, especially as we're seeing legislation being presented And really with the pressures we're having on our property taxes, the pressures we're having with no shared revenues for any of this, I think across the board, anytime we're able to find new revenue sources or ability to find even little pockets of money with the quickly changing landscape of where our taxes are coming and going, especially talking about the tax structure commission's report and the changes that they propose, which I think by and large are the league supports. Unless things change and the pressures on the property, the school end of the property tax is lifted a little bit more, towns are going to continue to be in a situation where they're just really pressured from being able to put investments into their communities or even do minor things. And it's always really interesting to me when I hear, like, for example, when I talk to, clerks about their elections and how they get small grants for, election boxes that, or like, a letter opener that they were talking about the other day, like nominal amounts of money that make huge impacts, but they just simply don't have the budget for it, because even a bump in $5,000 for a really small community is huge. And meanwhile, we have, lots of money going towards schools and a lot more access to that money. And towns are always kind of at the bottom with that heavy pressure on them from the cost of schools on the property tax.
Even don't they, I seem to remember from being on the Putney Select Board that when you collect your taxes, you have to make your payments to the school first before so if you're short on your taxes, the school gets paid and the town doesn't. Yeah,
they have to be made whole. I think that those are kind of the big ones that we're dealing with. Our municipal priorities are also available on our website. There's about 9 of them that we have. A few of them are kind of water related that are really not maybe so relevant to your committee. Some of them relate to Act 250 jurisdiction over our, designated villages and downtowns. But 2 that kind of impact your community that I didn't, or your community that I didn't bring up are, obviously broadband access, because we continue to see this being an issue to our towns, not necessarily our municipalities, but our communities in general. But because of the lack of broadband access, it's in our communities, it's having a huge impact on our ability to do things like doing Zoom town meetings and having access to, the voter, an online voter checklist for our town clerks, that might be in a smaller community that doesn't have good broadband. So it trickles down to our local communities and, and obviously growth of our local economies. So broadband is another really big issue. And then we're it's been a huge thing for in terms of our public safety aspect of things is our board of directors has put a lot of thought and energy into really pushing this issue forward. And the board is really happy and thankful that the Criminal Justice Council and, obviously from your committee and the House Government Operations Committee pushing that legislation last year to really shine a light on the deficiencies in our overall public safety system. And it continues to be on our radar, and we're thankful that we're partners in professionalizing these services and putting more trust in our government via our law enforcement. And that should cover it from our priorities perspectives.
So are towns looking seriously at around their zoning bylaws? Because I think that a couple of the things that we've heard in the last couple of days are that zoning bylaws can have a huge impact on both housing, which in turn can have an impact on, but in addition, zoning bylaws can have a huge impact on racial equity. And I just wondered if the kind of towns are looking at zoning through those lenses.
Yeah, that's it's hard to answer across the board. I know that the Vermont Planners Association and certainly more professional planners have started discussing this several years ago, but and I think it's filtering now to the regional planning commissions, and the regional planning commissions are certainly helpful because they are sort of the clearinghouse when it comes to regional plans, and then therefore the town plans they're in their jurisdiction. So you also have towns that are not on a regular schedule to updating their zoning. I think the towns that probably, or cities that have this issue coming up from their citizens are maybe more professionalized, or maybe have their planning commissions already looking at certain sections of their bylaws. But you have to understand that most of I'm the chair of my planning commission in my teeny tiny little town. It's a lot of work to update your zoning. It takes years to do it properly. And so I think the one thing I like to stress to those that say, it needs to change at the local level, absolutely, because those are our zoning bylaws. But the more help you can get from our partners at the state and regional level to provide, model language, webinars that explain, like, these are the things that impact you, the more regional planning commissions can communicate to their towns, especially the towns that they know are working on bylaw updates about, here, these are the things you want to pay attention to. Not just things like, you want to pay attention to habitat corridors and, connectivity, like in terms of land use planning, but also we want to pay attention to how our zoning impacts, peoples in our communities. And so I think it's on everyone's radar, but it's really hard to do it in siloed towns. It's almost impossible unless you're a bigger community and you're depending on volunteers to be doing this. And until there's more partnership or more energy put in at a more regional or state level, it's going to continue taking a really long time. And that's.
Is Guilford the only town left in the state that doesn't have any zoning?
Oh, no. There are several. I live next to Williamstown. They don't have zoning. I think the ACCD website has an updated list, or they think they update it at least once a year. And I think there's close to 25 or 30 towns that don't have zoning. Yeah.
Senator Polina, and then Senator Colomer.
Yeah, no great wisdom. It made me think that it would be a really good idea if the state somehow found a way to help towns do their zoning updates, because it shouldn't be, I understand it's hard, but it shouldn't be that hard because there's so many models out there. It just seems like it would be interesting for us to think about some way that we could support towns in doing that and make it a lot easier and quicker.
Right. And I think that's already, a lot of that work's being done, but there's just, when you look at, I really love telling people to pull Title 24, open it up to Chapter 117, and just look at what's there in terms of what a town and a region has to do to get through the town planning process, let alone updating your subdivision bylaws, your zoning bylaws, your shoreline bylaws. I mean, you have laws coming out every single year from the legislature that are constantly changing what towns have to do. And by the time they finish updating a bylaw, by next year, it's already out of date. So it's a constant struggle to stay on top of this. And it to me sometimes, and I'll a point of privilege here, but it seems a little futile to keep putting more and more requirements and mandates on what towns have to do to jump through hoops, when you probably would do best by doing it at the state level and not having it through the planning level, or at a minimum, if you really want it to be part of the planning process, to have model language coming through. And I think a lot of towns, when you're updating your bylaws, you're always looking, okay, what is, I live in Brookfield, what is Randolph doing? What is Chelsea doing? What is Williamstown? So you're always looking and borrowing from other towns to see what's best. And it can be a bit of a struggle if no one's done anything yet, especially with this issue, equity and access and housing, that you might be looking to maybe Winooski for an answer, but you're not Winooski, you're, Richmond, or you're St. Johnsbury, you're a completely different community. And how do you scale that to your community? So it's complicated, but I get a little defensive when it all gets put on the zoning processes, because there's a lot more to the story than just zoning. Because zoning, at the end of the day, is really, you're getting a permit. Maybe you're going through conditional use review or site plan review, but there's a lot of other things at play there. When it, whether it comes to being able to get financing, to getting state permitting, to affording the land, to having access to rehabbing buildings, or even just the cost of construction. It's complicated.
And I'm going to go to Senator Calmer, but first I'm just going to make one comment on that, is that we also need to be careful about creating models, I believe, that seem to apply to different places. And I believe that one of the reasons why we have such, in my opinion, kind of bizarre development in Vermont is because when we first started looking at zoning here, we kind of took the Connecticut model and just plopped it on top of Vermont. And so we have things like spaghetti lots because they had to be certain sizes, and we had with so much road frontage, and it just, we have to be very careful about applying other models to where they might not belong. So just a thought. Senator Collmore.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This may not be as much of an issue as it was at the beginning of this whole thing, but one of the things that was brought to my attention as being a matter of concern were the hours of operation of town and municipal offices. And I didn't know where we were on that now. Some of them have, revised it and they're open a couple days a week. There are some that are still just not open, I believe. And I realize it's probably not anything that the VLCT would take a position on because it's up to the towns, but where are we?
Well, as the last that I heard, the only town that, to our knowledge, the last town we heard that had problems with being completely off the radar with having open hours was the town of Roxbury. And that was brought to our attention maybe a month or so ago. And we did reach out to the community. And as far as we know that they have since opened operations. To what degree and what level, I'm not entirely sure. But as far as we know, all towns are open. They are working. It does not mean that they are open to the public necessarily. Some are 100%. Some are by reservation. And a lot of towns have used their drop boxes and other sorts of communication to allow for access, which is another thing where the clerks got the money from the CARES funds and other grants. They, a lot of them invested in these really awesome drop boxes for ballots, and now they're finding other uses, and it's helping with even mundane things like tax bills and dog licenses. So we are in contact with our towns that are always, again, like going back to what the towns are saying about the governor's press conferences and the ACCD, we are constantly updating our information about what the requirements are in terms of the safety mandates and the guidelines, and then how you scale them to municipal operations is another story. And then how you scale those operations from the town of Brunswick to the city of Montpelier is going to be very different. So I think a lot of towns, especially, I think talking to the clerks about this would be great, but I think that a lot of towns that are having the hardest time are the ones that have really aged buildings, small vaults, and small areas, and maybe a town clerk that doesn't have an assistant town clerk who's doing everything. And so it's just, practically speaking, it's become difficult. And you hear from towns who are trying their best to, because of that whole issue with the title insurance folks and lawyers who are having troubles with deeds. And again, like, to add insult to injury, we're in a pandemic. We have to have social distancing. We have to have these things going on that are required. And then you have these just unprecedented levels of real estate transactions going on and refinancing. And it's been tough. And the clerks in this state are rock stars. What they've dealt with in the last year is just unbelievable. They're incredible, but they're constantly having to stay on top of what's changed. And I think a lot of towns opened up a lot towards the end of summer. Everyone got a little loosey-goosey, things changed. And then you're seeing a lot of towns, as the numbers were going up in their regions, pulling back and limiting hours once again. So it's become a bit of a push and pull, but we're trying to tell towns you need to stay open for operations. Like, you need to be there, but you need to also be mindful of staying within the law.
Thank you.
Senator Rahm?
Quinn, you know that I can be pretty stubborn about some particular issues. And so you've been probably hearing me talk a lot about language access. Toward the beginning of the pandemic, I got responses from state government around, are you going to put this in other languages, et cetera, that essentially said that's kind of Burlington and Winooski's job, which was really alarming to me because we have Spanish speakers all over our agricultural areas. We have people who speak other languages in other parts of the state. And I just wonder if at some point you can gather more information from your towns about what kind of information would be helpful from the state in what languages. I think at some point we need to regionalize and standardize which languages are most spoken where, and what kind of information remains key. For many people, it was more schools than municipalities, but there was a lot of communication that I think even municipalities were trying to send out that did not, that they were basically relying on some of the more diverse towns to do themselves. And so, at some point it would be helpful if you could help us put that on the radar of the towns that we're curious what their experience has been and what common languages are.
Yeah, and it's interesting you brought that up because you had brought up the data issue early on in the beginning of session. That's always been a huge, I am so thankful that you brought that issue up, because even when I got a response yesterday from the mayor of Winooski when we sent a little survey out, and one of the things that she had brought up was that we need access to the state data to figure out what programs are being utilized. We need to figure out where the money's going. We're big and we're still struggling to figure out, because we're still siloed in our we don't want to be siloed, but we're just by our structure, we're kind of siloed. And having data is really important. And I think the elections folks it might be on their radar more than anybody else, and they are already stressed with having a limited staff and what they're going through right now. So yeah, we 100% agree, and the more information, the better. And like at the league, we try to keep track of everything, but it's still we the best we can do is send out an ask for people to respond, but they're getting those same emails probably from dozens of other folks who are asking other questions or the same questions. It's tough.
How do we solve that?
I don't know if I have a good answer to that, but I can tell you one thing: it can't be done at the local level individually. At best, the regional level, but most likely the state level. I think the thing is about regionalization, when you have things like public safety and land use kind of stuff, public safety, you can kind of break down those silos and work a little bit better together. And then I think that with land use, you have regional planning commissions already there, and that's kind of their expertise, which can also kind of help with emergency management things. So they're kind of tied together. But with this, the data that Senator Rahm is talking about, there's really there's no structure to kind of leapfrog off of to gather that at least I am aware of.
Well, it is something we should continue to address. Senator Polina?
Appoint a task force.
One to add to the list?
The list of task forces, sure. Sorry about that. I couldn't resist.
Well, there might be an appropriate home for, I think we just have to decide what it is that needs to be collected and how it's collected, and then where it lives, and then who has access to it. Isn't that what? But first, I think there have to be some statewide decisions about what needs to be collected.
Sure.
Which then, this is a little off topic, but it kind of ties to it, because I'm always thinking about how, with the issue of broadband, it also ties very closely to the issue of technology in general and how things are constantly changing. And we're always hearing from towns that by the time they invest in something, it's already outdated. And if there's any way to use the state's resources to help with technology upgrades, to help towns get, data systems up to snuff, it would be, maybe that's pie in the sky, but it should always be on everyone's radar to figure out how we're a small state. There has to be a way where we can join forces and use each other's powers to use maybe not the exact same systems, but to head in the same directions. Because if everyone's on their own trying to upgrade their systems, it's not very effective and certainly not efficient.
And I think we're doing that now with law enforcement reporting.
Yeah, and that's
systems,
great.
right?
And that's just like goes to show what leadership and just just a will and want to just really focus and run to the end zone does. But it took a long time to get there, and it was sort of, it happened because of not such great stuff. So it'd be nice to be ahead of the game instead of playing,
Right.
And I think a great example is the just one last thing is the grand list software, from the Department of Taxes, and it's it's a huge thing, but it's still kind of a small thing. But it took years to get to where we are. But it got to the point of like the system being so bad, and maybe that's what's happening with like the Department of Labor stuff. Like it is just so bad that you're forced to to move on, and it's unfortunate that it has to get to that point sometimes. But
so would this be helpful at all, committee, to look at looking kind of to you, Senator Rahm, is to look at what are the pieces of data that we need to be collecting in order to be responsive and to help both our municipalities and the state. So what are those pieces? And then where are the systems so inadequate that we can't do it? Is that a conversation that we should start having?
I would love that. I've been, it's a really big new topic for our Ledge Council, I think. And a lot of the examples around the country are from really large municipalities. It's like Burlington has been on the front edge of this, but it's, the New York cities, the Los Angeles, the Pittsburgh, wherever. And so I'm looking at our Ledge Council, but, I think it would be good to there is a way to standardize what do you have the resources to do and how do you start to tackle the most commonly spoken languages in each region. I think the big question that our committee should really be circling up around is how do we do this in a way that isn't an additional burden for municipalities to help us gather this information without enough guidance and resources to do that. Some towns are starting to track. These are the highest number of calls we get because they have services where if someone calls, they are paying for that translation service. And then, we'd want to be thinking about principles like police shouldn't have kids interpret for their parents in a setting that's very stressful. So, it's also about kind of how you create parameters around what proper language access looks like, and where it's needed in municipalities specifically. But just starting with state government would probably help our towns and school districts if AOE was, putting information in other languages, et cetera. So it's a really big topic. And I'm trying to sort of wrap my arms around it in actual language. But, our municipalities are going to need to be a major partner in this without feeling like we're burdening them with something rather than helping them sort of do this for their own citizens and residents.
And at the end of the day, Senator Rama, the burden, I think a lot of towns want to carry the burden if they had the capacity to. And again, that goes back to what happened this last year when you have this infiltration of resources and the de-siloing of infrastructure and agencies and peoples where you're able to get stuff done. And I think that's why the clerks are a great example is like, yeah, they had to do a lot. They had to do a lot, but they had teammates and they were given resources and they had the backings and they're willing to carry the load if they're able to make it happen. And that data is not only just necessary at the state level and what you want, but it's also really helpful at the local level and they would want it. But I think like anything else, they just feel like, okay, there's only so much we can do, and we're willing to go there if you're willing to be a partner with us. So
Yeah, exactly. And so much of what I heard was if towns had state information in languages with videos of what the governor was updating people of every week, the things that they could help amplify, that would have helped them immensely, because they are the backstop if no one can understand what's happening and they don't know what to do or where to go.
yeah.
So I was going to say that this is something that we should maybe put in our lessons learned preparedness bill, something about this. And then I saw Tucker raise his hand, and I don't know where he was going, but
I was just going to note that a good jumping off point might be to take a look at the statewide non-discrimination plan that was adopted pursuant to the Workforce Innovation and Opportunities Act. Any state agency that participates in the administration of WIOA, as it is elegantly called, has to abide by a statewide non-discrimination plan that includes programs for language access. So Burlington has a USA Jobs location that is funded partly through WIOA, and they have a language access plan. And as far as I knew in the past, that included opportunities for translation of state and federal materials that were needed by people who were using the USA Job Center. And to give you an idea of some of the programs that exist in the agencies that administer them, be the Department of Labor, the Agency of Education, and it would be partly vocational rehabilitation programs like that will have to abide by WIOA standards for non-discrimination. That could be a good starting point, and there is potential that the federal government keeps some data about access at those locations.
good, thank you. So I think we will keep this conversation going, and I'm not sure exactly where in our little siloed General Assembly, this we certainly have a responsibility to the municipalities, and to the Racial Equity Advisory Panel, so it's ours, right? Okay. I mean, we'll just assume that it is, unless somebody else is taking it up. Senator Clarkson?
It has already been identified in our not the language issue as much as the data collection issue was identified time and time again in our lessons learned work. So I think that it absolutely belongs in our bill on lessons learned, because we'd already talked about it. It's already been identified as a major issue. Just we need to maybe come into agreement on what data, and we should maybe double check with Susanna and others, but it's a request of the Social Equity Caucus, of our lessons learned, of Susanna's. I mean, it's everywhere.
Well, I think there are a couple different issues here. One is the language project in particular. And then the other one is all committees, I think, should be looking at what kind of data collection we need that corresponds with their areas. Because until we really define what kind of, and there's going to be overlap in them, but until we define what kind of collection data we need to collect, we're going to just keep adding things to, well, now we need to collect traffic stops, we need to collect implicit bias charges, we need to collect, and instead of just having an overall look at what the kinds of data that we need to collect and putting it together, economic development might come up with something very different than education and very different than, so I think we need to, and that maybe that's an issue that the chairs
Yes.
meetings have to
But
address.
You could coordinate that. I mean, just I think we could coordinate it and send out a bulletin to each committee and say, we're embedding as one of our lessons learned language or data collection, and say, what are the 3 or 4 data points or whatever that you would like to see included in that. And we could then just collect it and put it into our bill.
Okay, I think it's a longer conversation than just
But
that,
would
but
get it started.
Senator Ram?
One suggestion, and I can help figure out who that might be, but it can be really helpful when starting on this to have a legal expert in language access, because they'll tell you which federal programs potentially require interpretation, and there's a difference between written translation and spoken interpretation as requirements. There's a safe harbor provision for written, depending on the populations that you have. But it's helpful to know the nuance of the best practice versus what's legally required. And then there is this 4-part kind of like a rubric, almost a legal rubric for what is life-saving versus what's important or nice to have, and so it's helpful to hear legal expertise from like a civil rights expert about what is most required and where to start. And I think that seems like our job. There's no other committee that's just supposed to look at like, how does government do a good job of this that also follows the spirit of the Constitution and the legal right people have to information in their own language.
Yeah, that's a good place. Okay, thank you. Thank you. So any more questions for Gwen about, and I do want to continue the conversation about the pilot project and what we might be able to do with that, but not right now.
Yeah, and it's never the Senate, trust me, we know. It's always the House.
Well, it wasn't most of us.
Most of you, that's right, that's right. The enlightened ones in the Senate.
All right.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Gwen. Thank you. We're a little bit ahead of ourselves, but I think we can jump. We had the preparedness at 2:45, and I see David Hurley. He has joined us. So we're going to have, and Keisha, just for your information, the reason David Hurley is here is probably not terribly obvious since he's the director of the medical board, but we put some language in the preparedness bill that affected the medical board and their ability to function in an emergency. So when we get to that, then we'll see if he's still in agreement or if he has additional things for us to consider. So that's why he's with us. So I don't know, Tucker and Ameren, how do you propose doing this? I'll just turn it over to you and you can do a nice little walkthrough for us.
That's what we plan on doing, a nice little walkthrough. So for the record, Tucker Anderson with the Office of Legislative Counsel. Would you prefer a high-level overview where we focus in on some of the details that you put into the bill during the COVID response, or would you prefer a meticulous and thorough walkthrough of each section?
Committee, what do you think? I think at this point, a high level. Okay, that seems to be the consensus.
Okay. So to refresh everyone's recollection, this language was originally contained in S-354 as it passed out of this committee and eventually the Senate. When this bill reached the House towards the end of the September return session, the House took these provisions out and replaced it with a COVID emergency provision allowing Australian ballot voting at the annual meeting. So S-354 turned into the temporary authority provisions that municipalities used to convert to Australian ballot for the 2021 annual meetings. I will walk through the first, I believe, 6 or 7 sections of the bill that deal with open meeting law, municipal quasi-judicial proceedings, municipal utilities and water utilities in general, and the transfer of certain municipal funds in the case of a declared state of emergency, which is really just a repeal of an existing prohibition. And then I will hand it off to Ameren and try to coordinate my scrolling abilities with her excellent walkthrough abilities. The
Thank you.
the first section of the bill codifies the temporary open meeting law provisions that the General Assembly passed in response to COVID-19 to bring everyone back to what happened starting in the spring. First, the General Assembly temporarily authorized any public body in the state to hold a fully electronic meeting without designating a physical meeting location. The open meeting law does require, when you don't have that temporary authority, that a public body designate a physical location where either a member of the body or a staff member is present and where the public can access and participate in the electronic meeting. That was suspended because of the close personal contact prohibitions that came out in the spring. Then the General Assembly went on to allow electronic posting of notices and agendas and some other minor alterations to essentially allow fully electronic meetings. In the codification that is in front of you, you are setting up the automatic trigger for all of those provisions to happen again. So this section starts by defining what an affected public body is. An affected public body is any body whose regular meeting location is located in an area affected by a hazard and that cannot meet in a physical meeting location due to a declared state of emergency. Last year, a lot of questions came up about what a hazard is. Hazard is defined here as an all hazards, as that term is defined in Title 20. To bring everyone back to the discussions that happened in the fall, an all hazard covers natural disasters, public health emergencies, nuclear war, insurrection, and other significant events such as chemical spills. Let your imagination run wild about what a significant event requiring a declared state of emergency might be. These first sections allow during a declared...
Madam Chair, may I ask
Yes.
a question? I don't know if you can see me. I don't.
Yes.
Okay. So this does not let's say there was a severe ice storm and the select board had to make a decision, but nobody could get to town hall. It wasn't necessarily there wouldn't necessarily be a declared state of emergency in that particular town. How could a town use this when it isn't a state, isn't statewide?
The answer is they could not.
To happen.
The answer is that this section and the bill it was introduced by the committee last session doesn't address that issue. This is really only about when the governor declares a state of emergency for the whole state or a region of the state, perhaps a particular municipality. In the event that there is some sort of localized significant event and the governor has not declared a state of emergency, the answer would be that the municipality would likely cancel their meeting and post a notice for a future meeting, potentially in a different location. Or there are other provisions that allow, for example, you can cancel your regular meeting and announce an emergency meeting in its place, have an electronic meeting with a designated physical meeting location that is elsewhere, but that you have made a press release about so the public is aware of where they have to go.
I think the hope of this was not to deal with every emergency that might happen in one town and not someplace else, but more regional or statewide ones, and ones that would really prohibit meeting. If there's an ice storm in Brookfield and nobody can get to their meeting, my guess is they'll cancel their meeting. They're not going to that night set up for a remote meeting. If the ice storm remains for 3 weeks, perhaps the governor declares a state of emergency in Brookfield. It doesn't have to be statewide.
I hear you, but I can also see something that would require an emergency meeting, that there might be a hazard that would occur, an emergency in a community or in a region where it hadn't yet been declared an emergency, but they had to meet to make decisions about something important that was pressing. Anyway, I can see, anyway, this is great. And I know we did this last year. I just, as we have thought further about it, I just am trying to think as flexible, giving towns as much flexibility as possible.
Well, we should definitely, as we go through this bill more, we'll hear from the league about whether they have some suggestions about that.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, Tucker?
Subsection B allows during this declared state of emergency, first, for the public body to meet without designating the physical meeting location. It suspends the requirement that a staff member or a member of the public body be present. And it allows the public body to place their notices in electronic locations in lieu of designated physical locations. And remember, that is a specific requirement for municipal public bodies. So municipal public bodies under the open meeting law have to post their notices in 2 physical locations in the municipality. So there are some requirements if the affected public body is going to meet electronically. First, the body is required to use technology that permits the attendance and participation of the public through electronic or other means. This is a change that was made from the temporary COVID bills, which only required that the technology permit attendance. The request was that, the technology should also allow participation of the members of the public who are attending. Whenever feasible, the public should be able to access by telephone. And finally, and this is another change from the temporary COVID open meeting law provisions that are in play right now, they're required to post information that enables the public to directly access and participate in meetings electronically. And they shall include this information in the published agenda for each meeting. So if this were codified and moved forward, the requirement would be if you're holding an electronic meeting, part of your agenda, you have to provide direct access to the public so that they can participate in the meeting electronically. And the discussions that you all had around this was posting, for example, the Zoom link that would allow the public to access the Zoom meeting. Unless unusual circumstances make it impossible for them to do so, each municipality and school board shall record any electronic meeting that is held.
So could I go back one second here? I'm thinking about this, and I know we'll get more into detail about it, but in terms of Allison's question, we at one point, we have a paper mill right downtown Putney, right in the smack dab in the center of the village. And we, a couple of years ago, had a huge chemical spill and chemical fire there. And so no one was allowed into the village proper. It was all closed off. If the select board had been if they had to have a meeting to deal with something as a result of that fire, they couldn't have gotten to town hall. Could they then post an emergency meeting and have had it at the central school, which is outside of the village proper, and somebody would have been there? I mean, there are ways of dealing with those kinds of emergencies right now, right?
So the answer is that they could hold an emergency meeting where they put in the notice for that meeting the specific issues that they're going to be dealing with, which may be a response to this particular emergency. And they could designate a physical meeting location where public access is possible.
Okay, great. That's what I thought. Thank you.
Last piece, that the public body of a municipality is required under these provisions to continue to post notices and agendas near the municipal clerk's office, and then to provide each notice or agenda to the newspapers of general circulation for the municipality. And in case any of you are unfamiliar, each municipality has to designate the newspapers of general circulation within the town where certain notices must be posted. So we'll move on to two sections about quasi-judicial proceedings. The reader assistance heading says municipal quasi-judicial proceedings, but there is one state level quasi-judicial proceeding that you all worked on and that is included here. So the first section amends the Title 32 provisions around inspections pursuant to a grand list appeal of a property. To bring you all back to the work that you did, this issue was around in-person inspections of property. The listers, the Board of Civil Authority, whoever's performing this sort of inspection, was required to perform an in-person inspection of the property if requested by the property owner. And the issue that came up during COVID, again, was that these municipal officers did not want to be in and around the homes of individuals who are requesting this appeal. So the provisions would suspend during the state of emergency the requirement for an in-person appeal and would provide the property owner with the right to request an inspection through electronic means. So first, the municipality would suspend its in-person inspections. The property owner would then have the opportunity to say, no, I want an inspection, perform it through electronic means. And then the property owner would have to facilitate that, and the two parties would carry on. This same opportunity is given to hearing officers who perform the next level of appellate inspection. Section 4, dealing with the temporary moratoria on water service disconnections. This is an issue that you just discussed. It affected municipalities primarily because it prevented any utility provider for water or sewer services from shutting off those services during the declared state of emergency. The provisions that you put together here are a bit different. It maintains that any provider of these services shall not disconnect services during the declared state of emergency, provided that, first, the state of emergency is declared in response to an all hazard that will cause financial hardship and the inability of ratepayers to pay for water or sewer services. This is one area that the committee focused on. They did not want to apply this to all hazards that could come up or all states of emergency. It would only be those that will cause financial hardship and the inability to pay. And two, that the all hazard does not require the water or sewer service provider to disconnect services in order to protect the health and safety of the public. So you didn't want to create a situation where there's a declared state of emergency and the water has to be cut off because there's contamination in the water, right? You didn't want to set up a moratorium on water service disconnections that would get people sick. The other addition that you made beyond what is in play right now with the temporary moratorium that's in place is that this provision states that a ratepayer shall remain obligated for any amounts due to a water or sewer service provider that is subject to the section. And you put in a 90-day window for the ratepayer to make those payments. Section 5, you took some pieces of the temporary authority for municipal deadline extension, and here you add them to the Title 20 Declared State of Emergency chapter. This states that during a state of emergency, a municipal corporation may extend any statutory deadline applicable to municipal corporations, provided that the deadline does not relate to a license, permit, program, or plan that is issued or administered by the state or the federal government, and they may extend or waive deadlines applicable to those licenses, permits, applications, what have you, that are issued by the municipal corporation. So you looked at the window of authority that municipal corporations have around deadlines and certain licenses, permits, and programs. If there is a declared state of emergency in the future, municipalities would have the authority temporarily to extend deadlines and to continue the effectiveness of licenses, permits, and plans up to 90 days after the date that the emergency ends. So the final piece here is a repeal of the statute related to town highway funds. To bring you all back to the discussions that you had, under current law, 19 VSA section 312, town highway funds have to be kept separate and segregated from general funds. There's to be no commingling of funds at all. You granted
We don't want commingling.
You granted temporary authority during the year 2020, so we're already past the point of the effectiveness of that temporary authority, for municipalities to move town highway funds to their general fund or to move general funds to their highway funds. You weren't sure where the gaps were going to be during the COVID response. Under that temporary authority, all of the money had to be paid back and the funds had to be made whole by the end of 2021. Here, you're just repealing that prohibition. This is not contingent on a declared state of emergency. This would be a permanent change moving forward. You are lifting the requirement that those funds be segregated, which brings me to the last point in my portion of the discussion. That particular section, that repeal, has a different effective date, which requires some explanation. That repeal is going to take effect July 1st, 2021, and the idea of having that as the effective date, separate from the other parts that will take effect on passage, was that July 1st for most municipalities is the start of the next fiscal year. And I'll bring you back and hand this off to Ameren.
Thank you, Tucker. For the record, Ameren Abergele, Office of Legislative Counsel. I'm going to be walking through some of the sections of this bill that cover professional regulation before moving on to one last section on reserve funds for the sheriffs. So Section 7 here, and I will note that this actually, it says 3 VSA Section 138. It's actually going to be 139. There will be a 138 that was already adopted last year in the OPR bill that will become effective on July 1st. So we're going to update this to say Section 139. And the first few provisions we have in here about professional regulation are about extension of licenses and practicing without a license for a temporary period of time. So once again, this is only during a declared state of emergency. The director, and in this case, we're talking about the director of the Office of Professional Regulation, may extend up to 90 days at a time the expiration dates of current licenses to practice the profession attached to the Office of Professional Regulation. And the director could also waive any associated fees for license renewal that would otherwise apply. Moving on to page 10. This provision, once again, around the Office of Professional Regulation, during a state of emergency, the director may authorize a healthcare professional who practices a profession attached to the office, who holds a valid license, certificate, or registration to provide healthcare services, to be deemed licensed, certified, or registered to provide healthcare services to a patient located in Vermont. And this would be either using telehealth or as part of a staff of a licensed facility. And there are some parameters on here on, I guess I would say, safeguards, which is that the healthcare professional must be licensed, certified, or registered in good standing in whichever jurisdiction that they are presently licensed. They have to not be subject to any professional disciplinary proceedings in any other U.S. jurisdiction. and they cannot be affirmatively barred from practice in Vermont for reasons of fraud or abuse, patient care, or public safety. Moving on to page 11, a healthcare professional who's deemed to be authorized under this section will need to submit their name, contact information, and the location or locations where they will be practicing. Anyone who delivers healthcare services under the pursuant to this section shall be deemed to consent to and be subject to the regulatory jurisdiction of the Office of Professional Regulation. And the authority to practice under this section is going to remain in effect until the termination of the declared state of emergency, and provided that the healthcare professional remains licensed, certified, or registered in good standing. I unfortunately was not here with you all last year, so I don't have as much of the history as Tucker does on his sections. So I will have to circle back if you have any questions about the history of how we ended up here, unless someone has fresh recollections of what happened last year that prompted these. I'm assuming that, well, let me just say, should I stop here for questions or continue?
I can't see if there are any questions. So if somebody has a question, if they would just pipe up, but I will say that these the ones around health and licensing came either through OPR, the director of OPR, or from the medical board, the executive director of the medical board. So that's where they were vetted. So does anybody have a question about this section?
No.
I don't hear any.
Okay, thank you. Moving down then to the bottom of page 11 into section 9, this provision governs inactive healthcare professionals being able to practice. This, once again, is only during a declared state of emergency, and this authorization must be done in consultation with the Commissioner of Health. The director of OPR may authorize a former healthcare professional who practiced a profession attached to OPR, who left active practice not more than 3 years earlier with the individual's Vermont license, certificate, or registration in good standing, to provide healthcare services to a patient located in Vermont using telehealth or as part of the staff of a licensed facility. Once again, they would need to submit or have submitted on their behalf their name, contact information, and the location at which they will be practicing to the Office of Professional Regulation. Moving down onto page 12, the returning healthcare professional is only authorized to provide healthcare services without a license for not more than 30 days, and it must be pending their application for a temporary license. And again, the 30 days is limited to the extent that the director determines whether to issue that individual a temporary license. That is to say that if a professional applies for a temporary license and on day 20 is denied such a license, they would not be able to continue practicing for those additional 10 days to reach the 30 days. It is whichever comes first, the 30 days or the director's determination on their temporary license. And the director may issue a temporary license at no charge and may also impose limitations on the professional scope of practice as the director deems appropriate. Any healthcare professional who returns to the healthcare workforce pursuant to this section is going to be subject to the regulatory jurisdiction of OPR. Moving down to section 10. So once again, during a state of emergency, if the director finds that a board attached to the office cannot reasonably safely convene a quorum to transact its business, and if authorized by the Secretary of State, the director may exercise the full powers and authorities of the board, including disciplinary authority. The signature of the director shall have the same force and effect as if voted by the board. Moving down to page 13. And then a record of the actions of the director taken pursuant to this authority shall be published conspicuously on the website of the board on whose behalf the director took the action. Moving down to section 11. During a state of emergency, the director may issue such orders governing regulated professional activities and practices as may be necessary to protect the public health, safety, and welfare. If the director finds that a professional practice by a person licensed or required to be licensed by the office is exploitative, deceptive, or detrimental to the public health, safety, or welfare, the director may issue an order to cease and desist from the applicable activity. And it's worth noting that the director must have reasonable efforts to publicize or serve the order on the affected persons, and that a violation of the order shall subject the person or persons to professional discipline, which may be a basis for injunction by the Superior Court and shall be deemed a violation of Section 127 of this subchapter, which is the subchapter on unauthorized practice. Moving on to page 14, we are now shifting into sort of companion sections to these prior sections, but in this case, rather than the Office of Professional Regulation, we're talking about regulation through the Board of Medical Practice. So this first section, section 12, gives the executive director of the Board of Medical Practice the authority to exercise the full powers and authority of the board if it's not safe for the board to reasonably convene a quorum to transact business. The signature of the executive director shall have the same force and effect as a voted act of the board. And once again, a record of the actions of the executive director shall be published conspicuously on the board's website. Moving into section 13. This is a sort of companion section to earlier, which would authorize the executive director, when authorized by the Commissioner of Health, to authorize a healthcare professional who practices a profession regulated by the Board of Medical Practice, so long as the person holds a valid license, certificate, or registration, to provide those health services to a patient located in Vermont using telehealth or as part of the staff of a licensed facility. Similar to above, you have the same sort of parameters here, such as the professional must be in good standing in the other U.S. jurisdiction where they are licensed or registered or certified. They cannot be subject to any professional disciplinary proceedings in any U.S. jurisdiction, and they cannot be affirmatively barred from practice in Vermont. Once again, the healthcare professional who is authorized under this section must submit to the board their name, contact information, and the location at which they will be practicing. And a healthcare professional who delivers healthcare services in Vermont pursuant to this section shall be deemed to consent to and be subject to the regulatory jurisdiction of the Board of Medical Practice. Moving on to page 16. The authority to practice under this section shall remain in effect until the termination of the declared state of emergency, provided that the healthcare professional remains licensed, certified, or registered in good standing. Section 14 is again a companion section from above, this time again for the Board of Medical Practice. When authorized by the Commissioner of Health, the executive director may authorize a former healthcare professional who practiced a profession regulated by the Board of Medical Practice and who left active practice not more than 3 years earlier, against the same time limit as you saw above, with the individual's Vermont license, certificate, or registration in good standing, may provide healthcare services to a patient located in Vermont, again using telehealth or as part of a licensed staff of a licensed facility. Once again, they have to submit or have submitted on their behalf their name, contact information, and location where they will be practicing to the Board of Medical Practice. Once again, they are only authorized to practice without a license for not more than 30 days, pending their application for a temporary license, or until the executive director determines whether to issue the individual a temporary license, whichever comes first. The executive director may issue a temporary license to such a returning healthcare professional at no charge and may impose limitations on the professional's scope of practice, and that is at the executive director's discretion. And the former healthcare professional who returns to the healthcare workforce under this section shall be subject to the regulatory jurisdiction of the board. I realize I went through that second half a little quickly, but these sections are relatively similar to the first portion. Again, the difference being that these are professions governed by the Board of Medical Practice versus OPR. So before I move on to the emergency sheriff funding, are there any questions on those sections? I don't see any hands. Okay, I'll keep going then. So our last section, section 15, is about emergency sheriff funding. And during a declared state of emergency that affects a county, in order to support the emergency needs of that county's sheriff due to the emergency, the county's operations reserve funds and capital reserve funds, which are described in a previous section of Title 24, may be allowed to be used for the emergency needs of the sheriff, subject to the approval of the assistant judges. You do have a definition in here as to what emergency needs are, which in this case means the needs to respond to the emergency and includes hiring deputies, dispatchers, and other personnel and purchasing equipment and supplies. Moving on to our last page, the funding of these emergency needs under this subsection shall be in addition to the support of the Sheriff's Department set forth in Section 73 of Title 24, which sort of lays out the basics of what support the Sheriff's Office will have. There's then a section on reimbursement. So if a sheriff receives county reserve funds for emergency needs, they are required to apply to any applicable resources for emergency relief, such as the Federal Emergency Management Agency, FEMA, that are known to the sheriff for any allowable reimbursement. Within 30 days of receiving any such allowable reimbursement, the sheriff shall provide those funds to the county in order to reimburse the county for the funds that were allocated under this subsection. And it's important to note that a sheriff shall only be responsible for reimbursing the county an amount equal to the allowable reimbursement the sheriff received under subdivision 1 of this subsection. In other words, the sheriff shall only be responsible for providing to the county what they are allowed to be reimbursed by the resources for emergency relief, such as FEMA. Then there's a sunset for this authority. The authority for a sheriff to obtain funding for emergency needs under subsection A shall sunset 2 weeks after the day the governor terminates the declared state of emergency. And the sections that I just covered will also take effect upon passage. Senator White, I think you are on mute. I can't hear you.
You are right. I was on mute. I was complimenting you.
Oh, thank you. I'm sorry I missed it.
Well done. So, committee, I think that what we'll do is just, there might be other things we want to put in here. And this has not been introduced as a draft yet. I mean, we have the request in, but it might end up being a committee bill. So we can take time to put other things in it if we want. What I'd like to do right now is hear from David Hurley about the Board of Medical Practice section, and if that has changed in any way, or if you still feel comfortable with it.
Thank you, Senator White, and hello and happy
Can
New
you
Year.
turn up your speaker a little bit?
Oh, let me see if I can get that.
David, we can hardly hear you.
Is that any better?
No.
No.
Not measurably.
Oh, there.
Is it better now?
Oh,
I
no.
think that was Senator Collimore. I'm sorry. Let me, I gotta change the microphone.
And while David's finding that button to increase his volume, Madam Chair, may we take a leg break, a body break soon?
Yes, I think that what we'll do is after we've heard from David, we will then, unless there are any other questions about this up to this point, then I think what we'll reschedule this and hear from OPR and the sheriffs and VLCT about it, and if there are other issues that we want to add to it. And then we'll take a little break and then hear from emergency management systems. Does that work? Okay.
Okay.
All right,
Hi,
David.
is that better now?
Perfect.
Okay, good. So thank you. And I was just saying hello and Happy New Year. I haven't seen you yet in this new year.
Thank
And, thank you for inviting me to give you some feedback on this draft. And I apologize, I only had a few minutes to look at it. I got it this afternoon and was in another meeting, but
and you know, it is exactly the same as what we passed last year.
yeah, I mean, and it looks good on having had a chance to look it over again. It's really just some technical changes that I might mention, and that is on page 16 of 18 at the top of the page where it says in paragraph D, where it says the authority to practice under this section shall remain in effect until the termination of the declared state of emergency, and provided the healthcare professional remains licensed, certified, or registered in good standing. I think it might be improved by changing it to say something to the effect of remains licensed, certified, or registered in at least one jurisdiction and in good standing in all jurisdictions we're still licensed. So because people, you know, we have a lot of our licensees are licensed in multiple states, and they may let a license drop and really, you know, but what we care about is they have at least one state where they are licensed and they're not in bad standing anywhere. You know, haven't had something come up. So, and really, that's the only technical issue I had with it. And I just wanted to say thank you. Generally, going back to the provisions about being able to hold remote meetings during an emergency, that's been critical for us to continue operations. And it's working. I think we haven't had any complaints from the public. We've had contested hearings. We've you know, everything from small committee meetings that are mostly executive session to contested hearings on charges, and it's worked just fine.
Great, that's good to hear. Thank you. Any questions for David? I think, Emran, we might want to run that change that David just made, run it by Lauren Hibbert also to see if that makes more sense to put in their section also.
That makes sense. I will make a note.
Thank you. Thank you so much, David, for joining us.
Oh, well, thank you for having me.
All right. Good to hear that the open meeting and the those changes were helpful to you also.
Okay, great.
Great. It's good to see you.
Good to see you all.
All right, committee, we're going to take I don't have a clock here.
How
but
about
we're gonna,
10 till 3:30? How about 10 minutes till 3:30?
okay, 10 minutes till 3:30. Jumping jacks up and down the stairway.
You got it, baby. Here we go.
All right, are we all back here? So let us hear about EMS. What worked, what didn't work, what do we need to do, where do we go from here? And I believe that, I don't know if you all yet have met, Ameren, I believe you are, our contact on this issue. Is that right? Or is it Tucker?
Which I'm ashamed to say, I don't
Emergency
know what we're taking up right now.
Emergency management.
Yes, I believe that would be me.
Okay, so for those of you who haven't yet met Ameren, Ameren is our new Betsy Ann Rask. So you will soon meet the people here who are here to talk to us about emergency management systems, what worked, what didn't work, what they need us to do now. It's an issue we've been trying to address for the last few years, and I think have made some progress. And I understand that, Dan, you have this time constraint, and so we'll turn it over to you.
Thank you very much.
Oh, and we have a new committee member here. I'm sorry, I didn't acknowledge that right away. For those of you who don't know, Senator Keisha Ram is now with us from Chittenden County. Okay.
All right. Well, thank you, Madam Chair. And Senator Ram, it's very nice to meet you. I'm Dan Batesy, and I am formerly the EMS chief for the Department of Health. In August, I was promoted to Director of Emergency Preparedness. So I'm going to be ceding this role over to a gentleman named William Moran. He'll be with you, I'm sure, at some point along the journey. But I'll do my best today to fill his shoes. I first wanted to say thank you very much, because the efforts that you all put forth last year really were greatly successful. And just to give you the highlights, the major success was around tuition voucher systems that we put into play. As most of you remember, you gave us a pot of money for both paramedics and for everyone else. So EMTs, advanced EMTs, and emergency medical responders. We had overwhelming success in both of those pools. We completely filled all of our resources. So we used all the funding. We put 39 new paramedics into the paramedic programs that are associated with Vermont EMS. That is probably double what we normally would do in a given year. And that's really remarkable. And I would say that if we had twice as much money, we would have put twice as many students in under those circumstances, because we were turning people away by the time we were finished. We have more work to do in that, including trying to get a handle on the cost of paramedic programs and VTC and working with them. And they've been great partners in this. But overwhelming success on the paramedic side, and that's going to lead us to a heck of a lot more advanced life support providers roaming the streets of Vermont here in another few months. So really great. In the
I'm
other
not sure I'd use the term roaming the streets, but that's
I know, yeah, sorry, a little too colloquial there. In the other pot of money, we put 313 additional providers into class seats. And these are all, remember, these are all active providers in Vermont. So in order to be eligible for tuition voucher, you had to be approved by a service chief. So these aren't just students at Middlebury and UVM taking a class because they want to go to a PA school or medical school. These are folks who are actively on a roster. We put 313 into programs. And again, we used up all the funding. So who knows where it would have gone if we had more. And just to put that in perspective, on a given year, I'll take you back our last 3 years. In the last 3 years, we put on average in a year about 400 new licenses every year. And to get to that number, we have to train about 600. So again, that 600 number accounts for the students that are moving out of state and don't really ever intend to be in an ambulance. So and remember, we had this, we received this money in August with a November deadline to finish it. So in 3 months, we put nearly half as many people as we ordinarily would in a full year into our EMS system. So that is really a remarkable feat. And what it demonstrates to me, at least, is that we do have a financial barrier to bringing people into this system. And when I think about how we plan ahead and what are the things that we need to be looking forward to, what it makes me realize is if we intend to keep a volunteer EMS system, at least in partially a volunteer nature, we've got to think about what that financial barrier is, because clearly there's people who want to come in who, if given the financial resources to do it, will enter our system. So, but that's for future planning. But I do want to say thank you, because this has been a great boon. And also keep in mind, we did this during a global pandemic when 2/3 of our educational programming were shut down. There were no, for the entire period of enrollment, there was no classes going on at UVM. There were no classes going on at Middlebury, and those account for almost half of our students in a given year. So, this is really something that has been facilitated through your efforts, and it's been great. It really has been a terrific boon. We've also made significant progress with some of the other elements. We've had some great meetings moving forward, looking at competency and portfolio-based testing. I think we will have a meaningful plan in place here very soon. You'll hear from Pat a little bit later today. There's a very high likelihood that we'll have a pilot project with his program coming up. Again, I don't want to put him on the spot because there's still some work to do, but we've got a good concept in mind, and I think it's something that will be an innovative way to get people into our system coming up. And then we've still got a lot of work to do. We've still got to work on how to sort out the other levels of instructor. We've still got to work out how to sort out the new emergency responder level, Vermont first responder level. And that's a challenge, right? We're juggling a lot of there's a lot of balls in the air at the Department of Health right now. But again, we've got good contributions from the advisory committee. We've got good contributions, good people working on it. So I think we're going to be in very good shape come time to report back to you.
Great. That is fantastic. That is great. And as we go forward, I would love for you all to think about what, as we look at new CARES money coming in, to look at what might be a reasonable amount to devote to the training aspect. So, and you don't have to have any answers today, but I do know that the Appropriations Committee is asking us to look at that. And I think it would be very helpful if we had some real numbers and then this great information here to back up those numbers.
Well, Senator, I think we certainly have a model that will inform us on this. And I think we've certainly been looking at a lot of the data behind it. And I'm happy to share any and all of that information. So I think we've got good fodder for conversation, at least around this.
Good. Senator Clarkson?
So thank you, Dan. That's it's just great to know when things worked and that money was well used. And I'm glad you didn't return any of it. I'm glad you used it all up. I guess I would wonder going forward, I am hoping we will be able to appropriate significant money from the state with any stimulus bill that comes from the Biden-Harris 1.9 trillion they've talked about. I would assume that there would be some EMS kinds of money that we could direct to booting up and really getting the EMS systems booted up, staffed up fully in the state, or at least partially staffed up. So I'm hopeful. I'm living in hope that we can continue this work with a big money injection.
I did write a note to VTC, to the president, and asked her about the tuition difference and why there would be such an amazing tuition difference and she did respond to me, but I am going to ask her to come in the next time we get more into detail in this area about why there's such a discrepancy between it and the amount at GCC, because that's Greenfield Community College, for those of you who don't live on the border. So we will ask her to come in and talk to us about why that difference exists.
President Walden's been a really excellent partner in this, so I want to thank her as well. Yeah. She's been creative, and we had to go through several degrees of administrative machinations to find a way to appropriately fund these paramedics that are going through. She's been a terrific partner. I think she's anxious to answer that question as well, and we're anxious to help her navigate this also. So whatever resources we can bring to bear, including, numerous connections to other college systems and other programs in other states, we're happy to help however we can.
Yep. Yeah, thank you. Any more questions for Dan? Senator Polina?
You could just remind me about what the cost is per student. I forget. I don't remember there was a big difference between GCC and VTC, but remind me what we're talking about per student.
Yeah. So it's been about probably a year. Drew, do you have better information than I do?
Yeah, Drew.
And there are two different programs too, the provider one and the paramedic one.
Right.
Yeah, I do have some data about the cost of all of the paramedic programs in New England that I did after Senator White has kind of sent me a request for some research. So I do have that for you. I don't know if you want those numbers now or you want me to wait until later to present that.
Well, maybe just, I think Senator Polina's question was, we talked about the tremendous difference between GCC and VTC. And if you just throw that out, then we can get more into the other details.
I just don't remember the numbers. I'm curious.
So Greenfield Community College is a certificate program, 20-month program with a total cost of $9,000. That's costs and fees. And VTC is also a 20-month certificate program, and the total cost and fees is between $32,000 and $34,000.
Pretty big difference.
Oh my! That's
Senator
huge.
Senator Rahm.
I don't know if this is off topic, but I thought it was appropriate for Dan. I've just been following some language at the federal level about trying to make grants and supports available for mobile vaccine units to make sure we get out to our transportation barrier folks. And I just wondered if you all are following that. I know there's certain temperature requirements and things like that, but I wondered if you've been seeing if that's something we can put together for places like the Northeast Kingdom.
Yeah, Senator, we're not only following it, we're leading the way. EMS in Vermont has shouldered a tremendous burden throughout the pandemic. It started with testing, and we've supported our mobile testing efforts since the beginning. And we are about to kick off what will be really an unprecedented effort using EMS in Vermont to reach vulnerable populations. In fact, I'll make a specific note of Drew and Rescue Inc. They're partnering right now with Windham County Home Health to reach homebound folks, and they're ready to kick that off next week. I haven't heard of any other state in the union that's as aggressive and ready to go as we are in this field. We know that there's going to be a tremendous need for a lot of different vulnerable populations. We've talked to stakeholders from houseless citizens to assisted living centers to migrant workers. We've been chatting with lots of people. Of course, it's mitigated by vaccine supply, so we're going to start off slow and build capacity as we go on. But to answer your question, absolutely, and EMS will lead the way in that regard.
Thank you. And I just will say two things here, and then we can go to Drew. I will say for Senator Rahm's information here that we probably have the most incredible EMS system in the country, and they have responded well. Even before the pandemic hit, they were they responded and took care of our citizens in really incredible ways. And since the pandemic has hit, we should be very proud of them in all areas of their response. And then I would like to just, before we go to Drew, ask Dan how he likes his new job, and would he just much prefer to be back with us on EMS?
Well, I'll let you know when I actually do my real job. I've still been doing this pandemic response, 12 hours a day for the last year. But it was a great opportunity for me. And since my division oversees EMS, you'll still see my hand in the mix. I'm not ready to fully give it up yet, but it's going to be a different gig.
Okay, good. Well, I didn't expect you to answer whether you really wanted to be back.
But are you replacing the woman who runs emergency response now?
No, I think you're talking about Director Borneman over at Vermont Emergency Management. I'm replacing Chris Bell, who was the division director of the Division of Emergency Response, Preparedness, and Injury Prevention.
Okay, well, thank you for joining us. And I know that you have some time constraints, and so we'll probably be leaving us at some point, but we appreciate it. And we will be continuing this conversation because we want to make sure that we're doing everything, and not just in response to money or the pandemic, but if there are other things that we need to be addressing for our EMS system, we will be continuing the conversation. So
yeah.
And thank you all again. You've been tremendous partners in this effort, and we really appreciate it.
Well, I can tell you, Drew has for the last 4 years been, I was going to say a pain in my side, but I won't say that. He has been persistent in his needs. So thank you.
It's the nicest thing anybody's ever said to me.
Thanks, Drew.
Dan, good luck as you transition it. Good luck.
All right, Drew, would you like to?
Yeah, so, Dan got to steal the thunder there a little bit and talk about kind of the success that we've had with implementation of kind of our education program. I guess I'll just kind of add a little bit to that. We talked early in the spring, which seems like, several years ago at this point, but about the reduction in total transports that had an effect on the kind of the financial status of a lot of ambulance services, because remember, we are only paid to move people. We're not actually paid to deliver healthcare currently. Something I think we should probably talk about in the future. But as a result of that transport loss, there was significant concern about ambulance services that were not going to be able to stay viable. And as part of the CARES appropriation, there was a $900,000 ambulance stabilization grant that did go out. So with the help of the Agency of Human Services and the some federal funding, we're doing pretty well in Vermont. We have not lost ambulance services as a result of lost revenue this year, which is certainly a better position than I thought we were going to be in March. And that kind of lost revenue assistance we got through the ambulance stabilization grant was a huge help. We did have, like Dan said, some significant success in standing up a completely new style of EMS program. So for many years, 50 years, EMS education has been in person. It's been, a typical kind of 2-night-a-week schedule. It's kind of had this very historical existence. And given the pandemic and given the need to shut down education programs in the spring to prevent the spread of COVID, we needed to come up with something completely new. So not only did we kind of get that done during the pandemic, but we kind of redesigned it. And in the fall, we kicked off hybrid programs around the state, which are allowing us to reach people that we weren't able to reach before. Last year when I was testifying with this committee, we talked about some pilot programs that we had run in our region down here in southern Vermont, looking at expanding our access to education for the volunteers and the smaller communities through technology. And, you know, as we sit here on Zoom today, we're certainly understanding some of the advantages, though I'm not sure they're all advantages, but some of the advantages in our ability to reach people that we couldn't reach before. So we did get overwhelming response to the voucher program. We have a lot of data and a lot of information, a lot of education on what we can do with EMS education programs that have financial support. When you asked about what has worked, I would say that what we did has certainly worked. When you asked about what we need to think about doing, especially as we look at maybe additional COVID funds, is to continue to build a sustainable system. So this year we managed to stand up some programs. We've learned a lot, but I don't know that we've built sustainability into the program. We hopefully at the end of these classes, which again, we got started much later than our typical kind of class schedule, we're going to have some new people in our workforce, but we're still going to be short. Usually we have spring classes and fall classes. That's kind of the typical EMS pattern. We didn't do that. We kind of started late fall. So these classes are going to be ending over the next couple months. So we've learned a lot from those classes, but what we need to be thinking about as we kind of work forward through what funds might be available is how to get additional people into this workforce and build a sustainable education model. So kind of going down that path, we made, I think, some huge steps in that direction last year in legislation by addressing the instructor coordinator, the advisory committee, and through the education council that was created, has 4 working groups now that are taking on those topics of EMS instructor coordinator credentials, portfolio-based testing, the development of the Vermont Responder, which is going to be a level that will help bring people into the EMS system and increase our overall workforce.
Drew, do you want to just explain what that level is to Senator Rahm, because she was not aware of that?
Yeah, so this is a new level of licensure that we're going to be offering in Vermont, which will allow people that have the skills to provide life-saving interventions. For example, in a lot of areas, it would be a fireman or a police officer that has first aid, CPR, bleeding control, and Narcan administration training to be part of the EMS system and be able to respond to those calls. So for our smaller services, volunteers that have limited availability for training, this is a way that they can get the life-saving skills they need to help in their community. So we have some areas, I can say right here in our area, Windham County, where the entire first response workforce is now falling on 1 or 2 people. That responsibility is huge. And by adding these Vermont responders, they'll be able to, in some cases, increase their workforce by tenfold by bringing on a lot more hands. So it's pretty exciting, especially to our first responders that are trying to get this work done. And Dan kind of touched on some of the other interesting things that have happened to EMS over the last 6 or 7 months. We've been plugged into some of the pandemic related challenges, everything from initially setting up testing sites and working with the regional health departments or health offices to do their testing, to in-home testing for homebound people. We've been involved in transportation of non-medically necessary COVID positive or COVID suspected patients so that we can help to eliminate the associated risk of putting them into housing units like homeless shelters. So, for example, in our area, if there's a potential exposure of a homeless person, those people are transported by EMS to a shelter where they can be monitored and wait out their quarantine periods. So we've taken on all kinds of roles so far, and the most recent role that EMS is going to be undertaking is this massive effort of vaccinating the entire public. A role that EMS is, excited to participate in, and I know we have services around the state that are working to put their plans together, and we'll be supporting the health department in that realm. Down here in our area, we're working with Dan and his office, as well as the visiting nurses, and we're going to be starting home visits next week for those people that are unable to get to vaccine clinics, so that we can get some of the most vulnerable people in our community vaccinated as quickly as we can.
Senator Clarkson?
Drew, it's great to see you. So does that mean that's a big partnering effort with our long-term care facilities, our senior centers, to identify that population for you? You must be partnering with a huge group of organizations to do that.
Yeah, the collaboration that's happening right now in the kind of the healthcare arena is amazing. We've seen for many years silos in different kind of sectors of healthcare, as well as different sectors of emergency services. And if the pandemic's done anything, it's really kind of torn down those silos, and everybody's really pushing forward to kind of the end goal of getting people vaccinated. So yeah, these are huge partnerships, and the cooperation has been excellent. The working with the health department has been super easy, and certainly, other than Dan's daily call to tell us that he needs us to pull just a little bit more weight, which we're glad to do. It's been a pretty stressful but seamless pandemic for EMS.
So I'm just going to throw this out that was very interesting that you talked about tearing down the silos, because this morning, or right before this, we heard from VLCT, and one of the positive things that they said came out of this pandemic was the tearing down of silos, that they felt that there was better communication between state agencies and between state agencies and them, and the ability to communicate and respond. So that is something that we really, really need to keep in our heads as we go forward about the systems changes that we need to look at.
Yeah.
Okay, Senator Rahm, did you have a question?
Yeah, kind of along the same lines of just hearing about this extra level of training, which sounded like it was related to opioid issues, et cetera. I've just been following for a while experiences in places like Lisbon, Portugal, and West Virginia, where they have mobile medication-assisted treatment. And that helps, people drive by on their way to work or something if it's more convenient for them, or, go somewhere where there's a high population of people who need that service. Is that something that you all have given any thought, which might be an interesting way to sort of study the partnerships that are needed to be made for the vaccine, although different age groups, and sort of transition to having mobile MAT available to people?
I think that I'm going to let Drew respond, but I think that the MAT probably is more in the jurisdiction of the Health Committee and through the Department of Health, other programs rather than EMS. But I'll let Drew respond to that.
So I believe we're going to be moving into the area of mobile vaccination. So as we work our way through the kind of the vaccine process, I can definitely see mobile distribution sites being set up around in some of those areas as a way to reach more of the public. Dan is the expert on how that's going to happen, but I think you'll see those vaccine clinics moving to locations where people are.
mean, it might be that, Senator Rom, it might be that the lessons learned from how we do the mobile vaccine units could be applied to other areas of health delivery, but that wouldn't be through the EMS system. If it's going to be permanent, it shouldn't be through the EMS system, is my feeling. But Dan? You just muted yourself.
Sorry about that. So we actually have looked at MAT. New Jersey is a good example of EMS using it. When we applied their model to our system, the challenge in New Jersey was that it wasn't available in lots of places. Here in Vermont, we had such good access in the emergency rooms that it wasn't a significant, I'm not saying there isn't a need, but there wasn't as much of a need comparatively. So at that point, we kind of said, maybe we should leave it over there because it's a challenge on the EMS side as well. But I think what, if anything, this pandemic has demonstrated is how good a public health partner EMS is and how important their role is beyond the traditional movement of a patient from one place to another. And I think that has really told us that everything should be on the table.
Well, one of the things that we've talked about is that when the emergency management system was first put into place, it really was thought of as transportation. It was a transport system, and it wasn't part of our healthcare consciousness. And that we've been working really hard in this committee and with health and welfare to try to change that kind of culture so that EMS really is seen as a healthcare provider. And to that end, we need to look at what they can do, what they can deliver, how they get reimbursed for the use of their medicines, how they get reimbursed for actually serving people and going there instead of just for transporting. So we'll have Corey Gustafson and some other people come in and talk to us about how we might begin to look at the reimbursement part of it anyway. Sorry, Drew. Go.
Well, that's actually the other thing that is, when we knew it, and this committee certainly has, we've had this discussion. The other thing we made very clear early in the pandemic is quite how fragile the system is. So it took about 3 weeks of reduced call volume before the financial viability of our EMS system was in question. So as we've talked for quite a few years about how EMS is struggling because of the way that we're reimbursed and the low reimbursement amounts. It was very apparent when you started operating in the red just a couple of weeks into the pandemic. So as we kind of move forward away from the pandemic and we look at the need for EMS and the need for a trained and sustainable workforce, we do know that 25% of EMS responders are going to be leaving EMS in the next year. That's what our data says. We've surveyed our workforce. We know that a large percentage of those are leaving EMS as a result of the wages in EMS. So what we're asking of our EMS providers is huge. Just to put it into perspective, the EMTs that we are going to be sending to people's homes to vaccinate, observe for life-threatening complications on a daily basis make between $13 and $15 an hour. That's something that, moving forward, we're going to need to address.
Yeah. And if the reimbursement rate was different and how you were reimbursed and what you were reimbursed for, it would help in that. So,
Absolutely.
Senator Clarkson?
So on the workforce development issue, I'm just curious, Drew, we've discussed this for years, that the number of people you train, you invest in them, and then they leave for various reasons. I'd like to know if some of them, if we can look at EMS as part of the ladder into healthcare professionals. I mean, is it, nurses have a very well-defined ladder in workforce development. Could we better employ EMS as part of a ladder of a bigger system and instead of looking at it as a detriment to EMS, but really looking at it as a workforce development partner with then the next certificate program and the next training and maybe getting them to medical school? That's one question. And I have another one.
I can speak to that with my, my personal experience here in our workforce is definitely that EMS providers quite often are stepping their way into other healthcare careers. It's a way to see if you are interested in the healthcare environment. And, this year alone, we've lost 2 providers to PA school. We've lost 3 providers to emergency room positions, though they're still working at their EMS level. They're working in a hospital-based type system. I've trained, and I like to point out that I've trained 5 doctors that I now get the pleasure of working for. So it's it is definitely a career ladder.
Well, and that's great. And the question I think we have for EMS is then how do we better use that to then let them evangelize the value of so that we make it more of a feed, so that it feeds you, so that we help make them be, advocates for coming in and beginning at using that as an entry point for the healthcare system. Do you see what I mean? I mean, how can we better employ them to help us?
So I think there's a couple different things that are kind of playing out. And one is people are moving from EMS to other healthcare careers because of the level of reimbursement.
Yeah.
So a paramedic makes roughly half of what a nurse makes. But the scope of practice and the expectations are no different. When I come to your house and you're suffering a heart attack, I think your expectations are pretty high.
Yeah.
Well, I hope your expectations are pretty high. But yet the reimbursement is so low on the way that we reimburse and the calls that do get reimbursed, that it's very difficult to pay that livable wage to those professionals. So they do move on to other careers.
Right. I've got that, and we've talked about that. I guess another one of my questions is, where are the volunteers? I mean, because when we talk about if you are a real mesh of volunteer system and a paid professional system, and you're right, as paid professionals, this is very low earnings and challenged reimbursements, which we hope will get improved. What do the volunteers get? Do they get paid per call, or do they not get paid at all?
There are some services that do stipend their volunteers, a small amount for travel expenses and other kind of costs. Most of them don't receive any compensation. And those people that are true volunteers in EMS system are what we worked so hard last year at trying to come up with ways to support through the new first responder, through the access to education. The cost associated with becoming an EMT at $1,000 a student was in many cases being paid by the volunteer themselves. So most of our kind of legislative effort last year was targeted towards that volunteer support and getting those people access.
The Margaret Lagases of the
exactly.
world. Right.
I think that I would just throw in a thought here that while it would be nice to have people be able to see it as a career ladder, we also don't want to keep the EMS providers so underpaid that they have to go through for a career. We need to keep good people in our EMS system. We need to pay them to stay there, not to look elsewhere because they can't afford to remain there. And many of them are doing much the same things in their new jobs, but they're being paid better. So we really need to look at how we keep people in our EMS system. And if that's I'm sure it's more than just pay, but that's a huge one.
No, it agreed.
So, Drew, do you have more that you want to tell us today?
The only other thing I'll from the experience, and we're still facing this hesitation of people going to the hospital. So just as a piece of information, early on in the pandemic, we told everybody that the entire public that if you're not dying, do not go to the hospital, which is, it's interesting to see what happens when you tell people not to go to the hospital. They actually listened. We had people that were actively having strokes and heart attacks that are like, I don't want to go to the hospital. They told us not to go unless we're actually dying. And they really did take that public message very seriously. So we've seen our number of people that are expecting EMS to come to their homes, take care of them and leave them at home for follow-up later increase. Actually, in our area has doubled since the beginning of the pandemic, which is kind of an interesting piece of data for us, that people are still calling EMS, but are really hesitant to go to the hospital. So we're seeing more of that home treatment and then them following up later with their local primary cares. I don't know that I have anything specific. As you guys go through your session, I'll be glad to answer questions, or I can provide you with the data that we have. I do apologize. Our legislative report from the advisory committee is going to be a little bit late. We will get it to you as soon as I can tidy up the last draft. I don't know if Jim has anything else specific he wants to throw in there, but I would like to say thank you for the work that you guys did last year. We would definitely not be in as good a position as we are this year without that workforce development money and the ambulance stabilization. If we didn't have the ability to pay for those 300 students, which we desperately need in our system right now, I'm not sure where we'd be as far as workforce goes this year. So that was a huge help.
Thank you. Jim, did you have anything you wanted to throw in?
Oh, you've had some very eloquent speakers there telling you how it is. I want to review a few things on behalf of the Vermont Ambulance Association and the service, which is again very much thank you for the past year's services that you've done for us looking into this. There's nothing that is completely fixed, nothing that has been miraculously changed, but without your help, I think we'd be in much bigger trouble. I'm very proud of the EMS system that we have. The people are working very hard. The EMS people are helping in everything they can and they want to, and I'm so proud of them, but your help has been tremendous to us. When they talk about numbers, I just want to say this problem is not solved. This number of personnel that we need to get into, and not to take anything away, the numbers you got for us to get in to paramedic school and to get into EMT school, those numbers are still going to be very hard on us right now and into the future. So when, like Dan said, they have 313 people added through this course in EMTs or 36 paramedics, it's going to be probably another 3-4 months before even all those can get certified in the EMT. And it's really going to be probably another 1.5 to 2 years before the paramedics become online. This is a very big help, but it's a problem we need to really look into the future. If we can use some the COVID funding to help again this year, that'd be wonderful. That's my main thing, is we need to have personnel, and you've touched everything from we have to pay them to keep them. There's so much, but without your help, we would be in a lot worse shape, and we thank you.
Thank you. I do have two questions or two areas that we addressed, and I don't quite remember how we in the end left them, but one was the requirement that the Green Mountain Care Board look at the EMS system when they do their HRAP, their health resource allocation plan. And I wondered if that has happened, or if they have done it this year, and if they have contacted you to get information. And then the other area is we were seeing some potential pressure put on the system by those private ambulance services who were specializing in hospital to hospital transports. And we tried to deal with that around cherry picking and saying that if an ambulance service was going to serve in an area or be licensed in an area, they couldn't do that. They had to serve the entire population. I wonder if you can comment on those two areas and if there's been anything as a result of that.
Me, okay, I'll comment.
Or
I think
either any of the
that's
three of you, just
on the Green Mountain Board, they have not contacted us that I know of yet. And I'm sure that we're very busy, but we're so thankful that we're able to go into that and look forward, but not as of yet. And on the transport of the patients, it's a problem hospital to hospital, but we don't have a method that keeps them out as of yet from the past. But it's all determined about how we can make the system work for everyone within the local means as much as possible. I don't think there's a permanent answer from the past on that.
didn't we put something in there that said that if they're going to be licensed, that they can't cherry pick? I thought we put that in.
Yeah,
Dan
you
or Drew,
did
do you
add,
remember?
that was in the legislation. And those, it was a requirement for the health department to implement that as part of rule. So I'm assuming at this point, with everything going on, the rule has not been updated yet.
Okay.
And it is a non-discrimination requirement that needs to be added to the licensure, which would prevent ambulance services from, for example, only taking private insurance. So if I'm only willing to go to the hospital and pick you up if you have insurance, I think that's a terrible system. So I can tell you from our perspective, and I'm sure Jim's the same way. We take very good care of the patients that are in our system, that are in our hospitals, and any patient that shows up at one of our two hospitals that needs a higher level of care, whether they have insurance or they don't have insurance, we will make every single effort possible to get them to whatever care they need. And as long as, I think what you guys did is you kind of leveled the playing field and made that the standard across the board. So I think that will be helpful once the rules are in place.
Okay, Dan, is that the case, that it just hasn't happened yet because of everything else? I think you're muted.
Yeah, I apologize. So I don't know the answer to your question, and I'd want to just go back and double check. I don't believe it has. We've had discussions about rules, and the reason I'm hesitating is I can't remember if the interpretation was that it already existed and we had the capability, or if it was something we needed to do. Okay. I'd like to go back and look, though, to be sure. I don't want to give you a half answer here.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I would like to hear some follow-up on that. And I don't know where the Green Mountain Care Board is in terms of their new HRAP, but if they are working on it and they haven't contacted you, then we need to slap their fingers. So, and I understand that Shayla has taken a new position also, so will not be with us. Am I right about that, Dan? You do like to mute yourself.
Yeah, I'm sorry. My dog is eating his dinner literally 2 feet away from me, and it's kind of loud. So, anyhow, yeah. So Shayla's been fully dedicated to the response. I think she's been moved in sort of a different direction. I don't know if that will change as things change here, but she certainly has her hand in things as well. So, I don't think you've seen the last of her.
Oh, good. Thanks. So in terms of your dog eating his dinner, we had somebody testifying to us the other day, and we could hear this little shrieking in the background, and her dog was eating her 2-year-old daughter's mac and cheese. So at least your dog is eating his own dinner.
Yeah, well, yeah.
Anybody else have any questions for Dan or Jim or Drew?
Nope. It's always good to see everybody, though.
And as we go forward and we have more any legislation or anything that we need to do, Ameren will be working with us, and might be coming to you for more background information on some of the issues. Okay. So I see that Gwen is still with us, and I just wondered if you wanted to weigh in at all on the EMS issue and how in relation to the towns, because I know in some towns the EMS system is part of the municipal system.
Sorry, I was on a call, so I don't
Okay.
know exactly what you want to talk about. So I
Just wondered,
Okay.
we were just talking about the EMS system, and I know that in some towns, the EMS system is actually part of the municipal government.
Right.
And if you had, we heard here some of the positives and negatives and where we need to go from here. And I just didn't know if you had anything else that you wanted to throw in, or if you wanted to wait till the next time we took it up.
I'll wait. I just know that I think the nonprofits, the ones that haven't been associated with municipalities, just had a little bit more trouble than we did, because we had direct aid to municipalities. So there was just that extra step that was onerous on those folks, which is unfortunate. So I think we were in a little bit better shape at the municipal level.
Okay. Senator Clarkson?
Yeah, I'm just curious, Gwen, if you could, when you come back, if you could bring us data about what % of the EMS teams are municipal versus nonprofits. And Drew probably has that too, obviously. But it would be great if we could get a better set. I mean, you probably have given this to us in the past, but I'm not remembering. So what % are municipal? What % are standalone? What % are volunteer? What % are professional? I think that would help us understand the full universe. And I'm sure but I don't have it I don't.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Drew, maybe, or Dan, but I think with the different districts, don't they have an inventory of each agency, and then you can glean from that what is what?
Dan?
We're about to prepare for you something called the Stakeholders Guide.
Oh, great.
And if we ever get a moment where we can concentrate on something other than COVID-19, it's ready to go. The challenge has just been that everyone in our communications team is pulled in 1,000 directions, but that does contain a lot of that. And I think it would be exactly what you're looking for. So I would simply say, stand by, it's coming. Hopefully as soon as we can kind of divert some resources away, we'll have a presentation for you all.
Thank you.
If you give me 1 second, Dan, I'm looking at the draft. I'll give you the number. Maybe.
While you're looking for that, can I ask if this isn't directly related to COVID or where you need to go moving forward, but it seems to me that one of the first things we did directly related to EMS in this committee was when we reassigned or the districts. There was a lot of opposition to it, and we did it anyway. And I just wondered if that has worked out. I can't, Brian, do you remember, Senator Collimore, do you remember exactly what it was we did?
No, but I remember the discussion about that. Yeah.
Drew will remember because he's the one that brought it to us. I hope.
I can't remember the resolution.
Well, we changed for some reason, the membership on the advisory council did not have a representative from each district. And we changed that, and I don't remember how we changed it. And I just wonder if the change, whatever we did, was a valuable change.
Yeah, so I can speak to that. The big change was to the EMS advisory committee. So you restructured that committee and changed the membership, and also changed how the chair of that committee was chosen. It used to be that committee was run by the EMS office, and then up until COVID, part of that change was that the EMS advisory committee had to move from district to district so that it was accessible to all of the kind of the stakeholders, all the EMS groups around the state. Obviously, with COVID this year, that meeting has been virtual for almost a year, like everything else. But I would say that the change has been beneficial. We have pretty widespread participation in most of our meetings. I would say that, we're probably 80+% participation with people coming to those meetings. The reports and the information that you've been getting from the last 3 years has been a direct result of the change. So I think you're probably seeing more accurate, more available information on the EMS system than you did before. So, but that being said, I do chair that committee, so I may have a little bit of bias.
Just as a point of privilege, as someone who sits on a lot of these reports, like committees or study groups or whatever, it's a very high functioning advisory commission. It's you can thank Drew for that. He really does a really good job of getting everyone energized and involved. So yeah, good job, Drew.
All right. So he's a pain in the side of more than me. Is that what you're saying?
In the best way possible, though. In the best way.
Yes, I meant that too.
We
I just
call those
forgot that this
advocates.
is going out to anybody who's listening. So
I do see that we're live on YouTube.
Any more questions or comments or concerns or anything? And I think we'll follow this up. Oh, the one thing, when you are thinking about what, in terms of training money that you might need from New CARES money around the training and the education programs, I know that, Dan, you said that getting the instructor level and the first response level programs up was a lot of work, and because everybody is so busy dealing with this other stuff. Would it be helpful to have an additional person as a point person to do just that?
So the answer is yes. What we were really hoping for is is to fill our training administrator position.
Oh, right.
Which we're interviewing for this week again, and you guys know the saga of our trials and tribulations with filling that position. I think if that doesn't work out, and that person cannot be the point person on most of those projects, then absolutely. And maybe there is some room for a second person in there to help us shepherd some of these. We'd have to talk about it, but it certainly makes sense.
Well, it is unfortunate that you and the police academy also are having such a hard time recruiting and hiring and getting people here. And I've heard some of it is because we're so small that there's no kind of ladder for them. So people from the outside are saying, why would I come to Vermont? It's just a dead end job. But I will throw this out, that we had applications for the Cannabis Control Board, and there are 3 positions, and there were 94 applicants. So maybe you could recruit some of them.
Guess I'm in the wrong line of work.
I think so.
When you do your interviews, if any of them are EMTs, send them our way.
Okay, will do. Any other questions or concerns or anything? All right, well, Thank you very much, and thank you for the good work, all of you. It's an amazing system we have, I believe.
Here,
Thank you.
here. Thank you, thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
So committee, remember, we're not meeting tomorrow.
Good
You
luck.
get the day
No,
off.
our hearts are broken.
Well, in
What are
judiciary,
we
we're
gonna
looking
do?
at good time, earned good time, and you've earned good time here. So you get to get the day off.
Glad.
And Tuesday, just to let you know, Tuesday we're going to be, Gail, do you want to join us again?
Do we
I
want to
keep
go
losing-
off live? Do we want to go off live?
No, we can stay on so that people can hear what we're going to be doing next week in case they have interest. So Tuesday, I believe that the first thing we're doing is, Gail, do you want to help me out here?
Yeah, let me look at my notes.
I have too many pieces of paper.
We are starting after the budget address. We're talking
Oh, yeah.
about the public records of juveniles,
Oh, right.
and that will be our whole afternoon on Tuesday.
And then Wednesday?
Wednesday, we are talking about the governor's executive order with DPS.
Oh,
Right.
and the beginning of the reports from the council. Yep.
And then we'll be talking about the Criminal Justice Council.
Yep.
Thursday is elections.
Yes. So if anybody has the
Oh,
lists for
I've got to
me,
get you, Ryan.
you
Yes.
better get them to me, or Brian already got me his.
He
What is-
did? You are
Mhm.
a whiz. Isabel,
said
I bet
before the
Isabel
weekend.
helped.
What?
You set this, get it to before the weekend.
I, if at all possible, I can get them. So I've got them from the Secretary of State, from the town clerks, from Brian. I know VPIRG is about to send some in. I've contacted the Campaign for Vermont, and I don't know who else will have lists that they want to put in, but if VLCT or any of you or any of your constituents or groups
This
get
is
them to
witness
me.
list?
No,
Oh,
this is the list of things
Im-
that you want to see changed in our elections laws.
mm,
And then I'm going to make the list over the weekend and I'll get it out to you. And I'm going to try and put them together in kind of categories of things that some are purely administrative issues and some are more philosophical issues, and put them together in a list and identify who it was that suggested that change. If it was the Secretary of State and the League of Women Voters and VPIRG and Senator Clarkson all agree, or it comes from all of their lists, then I'll put that on there so that you can see where they come from. Unless you would prefer not to see where they came from.
well, I have a little list, but if I could have some, benefit of the doubt from the chair, that if I put something on the list that you've talked about ad nauseum and isn't going anywhere, that you just let me know and we take it off the list. Like, for example, ballot selfies, which comes up a lot.
Well, what I'd like to do is get everything on the list.
Okay.
And then we'll go through the list and see some things we may say, yeah, that's a really nice idea, but I don't think we can do it. Or maybe I'll just make the list and not put where they came from. That's what I'm going to do.
That would help me because I don't want to
Okay.
embarrass myself.
Okay.
But
That's what I'll do. I'll just make the list, put it in categories kind of. And then we'll look at the
we can-
list and we can deal with them as they come up. And some of them maybe we don't want to deal with at all. Some of them we may say this is a nice idea, but we don't have time to do it before March. And I know, for example, re-looking at the whole way we do public financing might come up as on a list. So that's a pretty big issue. That's not just, can people take a ballot selfie? I mean, so there's different levels of them here, but let's get them all out.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yes.
yes,
Just sent mine.
Okay. And then we'll start taking testimony on the on the kind of categories. And I'd like to, so if we can have the list done by Thursday, then we can line up some people to start looking at the, presenting their positions on different ones, okay?
Perfect.
Okay. And there won't be a bill there. We do have one bill, right? One elections bill.
Yeah, we can use that as a vehicle, or we can create a committee bill.
Oh, I know we'll have more elections bills also. So I know, Keisha?
This is just something I want to put out in a way that if it can't happen, that's fine. I told them I would make them a little video instead. But Vermont Law School next Friday afternoon is having their race and the law symposium. And they've asked me to speak around 3:30. And I said, I'll try, but if I can't make it, and I know the day before, I will make a video. So would you rather I just made a video, or do you think there's a chance that it will work out next Friday to leave
We haven't done the schedule yet for Friday, but I really hate to see us end at 3:00 on Fridays. I mean, I know I'm the reason we're not meeting this Friday, so I shouldn't say that, but we'll see. Let's see where Gail, do we have anything? So Thursday we have elections, and then we also have Beth Pierce talking about the potential retirement changes that she's proposing. And then we don't have anything on Friday yet, do we?
Nothing on the schedule. We tried to move the treasurer to Friday and she's not available.
Okay, well, we'll do her like at 3:15 or so on Friday. I mean, on Thursday.
Mhm.
Okay, all right.
Thank you.
Anything else?
Nope.
Thanks, bye. Have a nice weekend.